Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Remote Braille Challenge Finals webinar series. My name is Carla Corona. I am the youth instructor in our Coachella Valley Regional Center here at the Braille Institute, and I will be the moderator today. This is our third webinar in the series titled Access Technology for Blind and Low Vision Accessibility, presented by Dr. Yue-Ting Siu. Thank you to everyone who attended our webinar yesterday presented by APH. We are excited to share today's webinar with you. We will be hearing from our presenter shortly, but I'd like to start with a little housekeeping and announcements. First, thank you all for being here. A huge congratulations to all of our Braille Challenge finalists, and congratulations on finishing your testing for the first ever Remote Braille Challenge Finals. We are all truly so proud of you, and you should be proud of yourselves. Also in attendance, we have proctors who volunteered to help make this challenge happen and went above and beyond for their finalists. Braille Challenge regional coordinators who make the entire Braille Challenge program possible each year. Teachers, staff, volunteers, program partners, and much more, who together create a network of support for all the students that you serve. Welcome to Microsoft Teams. As an attendee, no video or audio of you will be shared. You will only be viewing the webinar. To interact, there is a chat feature that you can use to ask questions. So either tab until you find the Ask Question button, or if using a mouse, you can find the Ask Question button on the right side of the screen. Throughout the presentation, we will be pausing periodically to allow for questions and answers. You have the ability to send questions at any time during the webinar, so you do not need to wait to submit a question. So if you submit a question but do not see it in the public chat, please know that we are seeing your questions but are waiting to make them public. Other than the question feature, there is nothing else you need to know regarding Teams. Just sit back and enjoy the webinar. We encourage everyone here to attend the rest of our webinar series this week as well. We have our final webinar tomorrow. I'll share more details at the end. Also, please tune in to our live stream award ceremony next Friday, July 31st at 2 p.m. It'll be streamed on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Braille Institute. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Dr. Yue-Ting Siu's book, Access Technology for Blind and Low Vision Accessibility. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our webinar presenter, Dr. Yue-Ting Siu. Dr. Siu is a teacher of blind and low vision students and coordinates the program in visual impairments at San Francisco State University. She has worked with students of all ages with visual impairments and additional disabilities, including deaf blindness. Her research focuses on enhancing TVIs proficiency with access technology, social media for ongoing professional development, and innovations in multimedia accessibility. Yue-Ting's mission is to align technology initiatives with universal design and empower learners with equitable access to information. Without further ado, I present to you the Access Technology for Blind and Low Vision Accessibility, presented by Dr. Yue-Ting Siu.
Hey everybody, and hopefully you are seeing me okay and hearing me okay. And I got to tell you guys, you know, I know we're in a virtual format, but I'm still just as nervous as if we were, as if I was presenting in person. I'm sure the finalists felt the same way, and just wanted to say congratulations to all the families who supported your children to participate in the Braille Challenge. And especially wanted to congratulate all the finalists who did make it to the nationals. So I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you, Braille Institute, for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you guys. And as mentioned, I welcome any and all questions. So, if you do have a question that you don't necessarily want it to be publicly announced, you can still put it in the chat and I'll document it. And I can always certainly answer every question anonymously if that helps you, okay? So I do want to welcome you guys to make this a really open forum, and I want to be sure I can address any questions that do come through. So I don't have a lot of slides for you today. I really wanted to make this really tailored to what you guys want to know about and how to better support your kids as we go back to school. And I think we all agree now more than ever, if we don't have technology, it's getting increasingly more difficult to access education in general. So, aside from those equity issues, today, I hope we can talk about, just the assumption that kids will have good access. I know the basic foundations of internet is not everywhere, but especially for our students, technology is not an option. It's absolutely needed for them to be able to access their learning and information in their environment. Okay, so let me share my screen here and we can get moving. Okay, and I think I'm going to go into slideshow view, hopefully. Okay. So thank you, Carla, so much for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Ting. I'm a teacher of blind and low vision students. I'm also dually credentialed in orientation mobility, and I currently coordinate the teacher prep program in visual impairments at San Francisco State. So if anybody is interested, wants to go back to school, maybe somebody out there has a really good para you've been working with, we are always looking for new TVIs in the field. And you can find us at viprogram.sfsu.edu. So this morning, thanks again for joining me. It is 10 a.m. where we are, and for any teachers who are out there, I appreciate you, spending an hour and a half of your summer break. And I saw this really interesting graphic on social media. It made me laugh yesterday, where there's a picture of somebody mowing the lawn, and in the far background there's like a swirling tornado. And I feel that that really defines what we're going through this summer for parents, families, and teachers alike, where there's this hurricane tornado in the background, this swirl of unknown with school coming back in sort of an unknown sort of landscape. And all of us we're still trying to enjoy the last bits of summer vacation. So my intentions this morning is for us to just have fun talking about technology. I know this is a subject that gives some people anxiety. It definitely gives me anxiety too, because the most reliable thing about technology is that it does fail. But this morning, let's talk about all the excitement and opportunities technology brings, especially for our blind and low vision students. So on this slide, there's a little cartoon graphic. It's actually taken from the book, and it's just a graphic of a little boy with his teacher, presumably his TVI, and they're just jumping up in the air, waving their hands and saying, "It's New Tech Day! It's New Tech Day!" And this is the excitement that we need to convey to our kids when we are introducing technology, using technology. And it's something to be excited about, no matter how nervous it might make us feel or how uncertain it might make us feel, especially if you are, a typically sighted educator or a sighted parent who does not use the same technology as a student. It's something that we have to still convey confidence and excitement about. And when we run into issues, it's like, all right, let's see how we can troubleshoot this. And you might be sweating a little bit on the inside, but this is an opportunity to figure out technology when there's something to troubleshoot. So I absolutely believe that just embracing these opportunities for troubleshooting and figuring out issues when they come up, not if, but when. This is in itself a big learning process with technology. So, I'm challenging how we think about technology a little bit here, because we've typically thought of technology for blind and low vision individuals as a form of like assistive technology, like helping, quote unquote, the blind, and helping this demographic of people who can't help themselves. And this is a very, kind of ableist and detrimental thinking to pass along to our kids. And rather, I think it's a lot more effective, it's a lot more productive to think of technology in terms of access. So what technology really does is facilitate one's access to information. And this is something that everybody can get on board with, whether it's, accessing the internet to browse, accessing, the internet to find a recipe online, being able to read a book in any kind of formats, whether it's a paper book or something that you read on a Braille display, something that you enlarge on a screen, or something that you listen to. And this idea of access, it's information everywhere in the world. We have to interface with technology even to, find where we're going, to find a restaurant, sometimes even to read a menu. It's on a screen now, or finding signage in the environment. A lot of things now are mediated through a screen, and it requires technology to do so. So I really like to think about technology for our students in terms of access technology, because it's access to all forms of information. And it's no longer this idea of assistive, but rather when we think about access, it's a way to empower the student and get the students to think about, well, how do I want to access information? What tools do I want to use? And those decisions might be different depending on the task. I think before, when we were coming from this assistive part, at least as teachers, it was always like, oh, well, I need to teach the student how to use X, Y, and Z. And I need to figure out how to get the students buy-in to use this technology that I know is going to be best for them. Well, you know what? Let's throw that all out the window, and let's really focus on empowering the student. And by doing that, our job shifts to how can we teach the students to be informed consumers? So the students ultimately need to be able to make these decisions about which tool they want to use, depending on what they want to accomplish. And ultimately, we have to prepare these students to make these decisions for themselves. And it starts from the very beginning, which I know might sound a little bit weird to let a younger student decide what to use. But when we do that, we get our children and students in the habit of being in the driver's seat to determine how they want to access information. So I think my job as a teacher of blind and low vision students is to help just to introduce the range of tools available to a student. And ultimately, when the student can make that decision, we've got their buy-in from the beginning. Even for older students, sometimes I've got older students who have gotten into this mindset of, oh, I don't want to use that, that I don't want to be different from my peers, right? I think all of us have heard that. And it can sometimes be a process because, we still have to get the foundations of building the rapport with the student, building a student's trust. And, as any parent knows, you provide the information to the child, and you just have to trust that you've done a good enough job that they will ultimately make the decisions that are best for them. And then the other part of shifting from assistive to access is it gives some common ground, understanding, and language to empower the school team. So when we're talking about, oh, well, we just need to access the learning curriculum, we need to access the learning media, we need to access the education, this no longer is a quote unquote special ed thing. This is a way to engage the inclusion specialists, the general ed team, the administrators, and all the technology people who make those decisions about who gets access to what and who gets to use what. We all know that it really takes a village to make sure all the appropriate supports are in there for school. And this is no different, but when we think about access, we've got a lot more people on our team, and it's also getting the buy-in of the school team to support everything that a blind or low vision student might need. And also, if there are remembering that you guys can ask questions as you need it. I'm actually unable to see the Q&A window as I'm screen sharing. So if there is a relevant question, Braille Institute team, please interrupt and let me know. And if it seems like a question better answered later, then we will hold other questions to the end. Okay? But do
Sounds good, and we'll send them through. Okay,
great. Thanks, Matt. Okay, so as Carla mentioned, I just recently published a book. It's called Access Technology for Blind and Low Vision Accessibility. And if you just do a Google search for Access Technology and APH, it should come up. And APH is the American Printing House for the Blind. It's available in print and EPUB. And really exciting, you guys, because due to our recent pandemic times, there are delays in printing, but what APH is doing right now is if you order the book in print, they will provide the EPUB, the digital copy, to you immediately so that you don't have to necessarily wait for the print copy. And yes, the EPUB is accessible, because how terrible would that be if we were to publish a book about accessibility and not have it accessible to everybody? So a lot of the concepts we're going to be talking about today are also in the book. I know sometimes with technology you have to hear it, read it, see it, review it a bunch of different ways and a couple different times. So I'm so happy and grateful that the Braille Institute has actually provided a copy to every single finalist candidate and their families. So that is super cool. I hope that the book will be useful to you, and a lot of these ideas were also documented in the book in case you need further reference points when you talk to your school teams. Okay. All right, so a couple questions for you, and I know you guys are on mute, you don't have your videos, but I want you guys to take a minute here, pause, and think about how many devices have you touched from the time you woke up today? Some of you guys might have been awake for an hour, 2 hours. If you've got kids, you might have been awake for 3 or 4 hours already. So just think about it. From the time you came to this webinar, how many devices did you touch? All right, keep that number in your head. And I'm gonna think about how many devices I touch. Well, my alarm clock is on my phone. I'm experimenting with tracking my sleep. So I've got my Apple Watch, so that's 2 already. I've got my laptop that I'm presenting on, and because I've always got backup plans, and just in case the laptop explodes and dies, I also have my iPad here. So already I've touched 4 devices today, and I didn't really have to think about operating the device, but I just thought about what I wanted to accomplish, and that's how I decided which device I chose. And so if we think about how we ourselves are fluent in technology and how much we use technology as a mediator to accomplish tasks, even in our daily lives, this is the sort of proficiency that we need to support our students to have. So, we never want our students to be struggling with the technology so that they're actually focused more on the device rather than the learning. We want to teach them technology in a way that it's really integrated and it's simply a tool to support, completion of whatever task you want to do. And so, if you think about, well, how often do I access information on a screen? Yeah, of course, the focus here is education. We're talking about back to school, we're talking about students, but it's not just for the purpose of education and learning. It's also for their future employment. And really, for many kids, I think the hook is going to be, how am I going to get to my entertainment? How do I now like engage with my friends, especially when we're all remote? How do I watch these videos that everybody's talking about? How do I look up a recipe that somebody's talking about? How do I engage on social media? And so a lot of these things, it encompasses reading, writing, expression of what you know, and it's all mediated by tech. And so how do we get our students to this point where they're not struggling with the tech? And we can, we might be struggling as a sighted parent or sighted teacher, but again, we're not going to pass that struggle on to the student. We're always going to focus on that excitement piece of how do I introduce the student to get them excited about it, and then they're going to take off with it. So moving along, just to review here so far, we're talking about the purpose of technology. And again, it's that facilitating one's access to information. But remember that as much as we emphasize accessing stuff for blind and low vision students, it's also about giving them tools and strategies to engage with that information. So it's a two-way flow here. It's not just accessing, but it's also how do I create information? How do I play with this information? And when we can get our students into engaging with information and ultimately disseminating information, so this is like I can create something, I can be a leader in my classroom, I can be an equal contributor in my classroom, I can now be seen as an equal member of my classroom and learning community. This is huge, and this is ultimately what we need to do for our students with visual impairments. Too often I think our blind and low vision students, are very aware of like needing sighted assistance. And we can flip the script here and position our students for leadership in their learning communities. And I think that is huge. And when students are able to do that with the right amount of collection of tools in their toolbox, the buy-in is right there. Okay, but we have to get the students in the habit of being entitled for these forms of access and engagement right from the beginning. Okay, so remembering that the goal for our students is to help them focus on the task, not the technology, but really focusing on the task. And for any teachers who might be watching here, I think a lot of times we, and I say we, including myself, you get a little overwhelmed by all the tech out there. Oh my gosh, I have to teach the student now. How do I learn how to do this? I don't use a screen reader in my regular daily tasks. How am I going to teach this? And we're so focused on what tech do I need to teach? What keyboard commands do I need to teach? That we lose sight of why we're choosing technology in the first place. So for anybody out there who's wondering, well, where do I start? How do I even decide what to teach? I really want to encourage you to identify the task first. Focus on what needs to be accomplished, and that will dictate what slice of the technology you're going to teach. Parents, sometimes it's like, well, I want to share this experience with my child. Great. Think about what other children that same age are doing and focus on just teaching those sorts of parallel tasks for your child. Or if there are siblings, if you have older children, what was that older sibling doing when they were this age? And these are the types of activities that we want to facilitate the blind and low vision child to be able to do too. And also with technology, remember that technology and devices and these high-tech things, it's only one of several different tools that our students need to use. I always focus on actually no tech strategies first, because remember, the most reliable thing about technology is that it will fail. So our students need really good backup systems. They need to know how to do the same thing in many different ways using many different tools. So for example here, I'm working with one of my students is going into 3rd grade this year. He's got low vision, and we started working together when he was in 1st grade. So 1st grade, it was talking about all sorts of different ways to read. And yeah, he wasn't reading yet, but what are all the different ways he could start accessing the print on paper? So, by the end of 1st grade, he could identify 5 different ways to read. He could say, well, I could pull out a highlighter and mark the line as I read. I can pull out my little, a piece of paper or my little card that I have on my desk and, move it along down a page of text as I read. Well, I could put it under my big desktop CCTV, which used to be in his classroom, but now is in his home. I could put it under my document camera, or I could read it on my iPad. So by the end of first grade, he already had 5 different ways for reading. So 5 different ways of accessing that print information. In the second grade, we really emphasize, well, how do I engage with this? And how do I write? How do I start that authoring process of writing and expressing something? And so by the end of 5th grade, or I'm sorry, by the end of 2nd grade, he also had 5 different ways for writing. So going into 3rd grade now, he's already got all these different strategies and tools for reading and writing, and it includes no-tech and high-tech tools. And this is what we need because, in some instances, this kid might want one tool or strategy. In another instance, he might want a different one. And my job is to help him make those informed decisions. So there's never been an issue of him not wanting to use certain tools because there's always choices. And all of our kids should have these choices for how they want to access information in their learning, just the same as we do in our daily lives. Okay, so moving along to the next point here, remember that concept development needs explicit instruction. And many of us who have been working with blind and low vision students, we know this. I mean, pre-teaching is a big part of what we do. Parents who absolutely know this, what are these ideas and concepts that you need to talk about with your child before you go and attend an event that they're unfamiliar with? Or, before going to a zoo, you might listen to different animal sounds. You might watch a YouTube video to get like a sense of what a zoo is like. So there's a lot of this pre-teaching that happens with our students that helps our students get the concept development they need in order to really understand what's happening. And the same goes for technology. So I wanted to talk about this point real quick and get you guys thinking about how you can support your child's concept development when it comes to virtual interfaces. So on the left side of this slide, I have the question, what is a numpad? So what is a number pad? And I actually had a lot of fun with this concept this summer when I was teaching a summer school student because I noticed that he was just learning how to use VoiceOver on the iPad. So just learning how to listen to a screen reader. And when you sign into your phone or a tablet, it always prompts for some sort of passcode if you don't have the fingerprint thing or the Face ID. And so, I could sense that the student was kind of swiping around and he could hear the different numbers being read aloud, but I could tell that he was a bit lost in space. So he didn't really have this idea of like, oh, the numbers are actually laid out on a number pad. So we went through this first, we put numbers on Post-it notes and we put the Post-it notes on the table and laid it out like a number pad. So then he could visualize and have an idea of what a number pad is and what the layout is. Because then now we can talk about a grid layout and what is a table, and there's rows and columns. And now he's got a sense of where things are in this virtual space, even though his screen reader is just reading things in a linear fashion. So this ended up being a huge learning experience, both for me and the student, because I realized that before we can even delve into like, how do I operate the screen reader, he had to have an idea of how things are laid out on a screen. So I'm going to come back to this point on the next slide, but I want to just show you guys what's on the second picture on the slide. So looking on the right side of the slide, I asked the question, what is a rotor? So for anybody who has had to use VoiceOver on an mobile Apple device, so like an iPad, an iPod, an iPhone, you'll know that there are certain features that are only available to a screen reader. So there is one feature called a rotor, and this is something that is like, there's like a virtual knob on the screen that you can turn for features. This is something that we don't see. This is something that you only access a screen reader. And again, it's something that's on the screen that's mimicking the action of a dial. So for a lot of our kids, again, they need to get that sense of that concept of what is this dial that you're talking about? Like, you're asking me to move my hands in a certain way, but I don't feel a dial. And it's like something in my imagination. So yeah, how do we help kids imagine what this dial is? And this is one kind of teaching aid that I wanted to show you guys. It's a 3D printed model of a dial, and it's meant to teach the kids how to use a rotor. So this 3D print is designed by Neil McKenzie. I'll give you his information on the next slide. Neil is just so masterful at figuring out what sorts of virtual concepts need more concrete instruction. So he designed this 3D print, and this is a great way to teach the idea of turning a knob or turning that dial, gaining that motion of it, being able to visualize the idea of, these different settings that you're going to dial through when you turn the knob. And then my next step is, I might start with something concrete like this, and then I'll just have the student, okay, let's try it off the screen. Let's try it on the table. Let's make sure you can get that motor movement. Let's make sure you've got those fine motor skills to be able to use 2 or 3 fingers at a time. Or, if we're working on a double tap, can I take one finger and double tap the table? So we always want to have students try these things with concrete items to make sure they've got the idea of how to operate something. That way, when the students move to doing things on a screen, you get a higher chance of success right away. So a little bit more on these virtual interfaces. Again, it's like teaching the students where they are in space. Like, where am I when I've got this screen reader on? Or where am I when I'm trying to figure out like what's what on a screen? So the direct instruction is so critical before we can even pop kids on technology. What you see here on this slide is a screenshot. And this is from the Sonoma County Office of Education, their vision support program. And so in case anybody's wondering, where can I get some of these tactile teaching aids? These are actually all posted for public download, free download. So what you can do with something like this is these are actually graphics that you can print out on specialized swell paper. And then you put it through a swell machine, or the name brand is PIAF, P-I-A-F. And then all the black ink will poof up, and it gives you a really nice tactile graphic that you can use to help teach kids, like, okay, this is how Google Slides is laid out. This is how Google Drive is laid out. This is how the Zoom interface looks. And in this way, you can give that kids a mental map of what they're encountering when they get when they're online. So I really appreciate Neil McKenzie's work here. You can follow him on Twitter at @AT_Neil, and he's always posting the most innovative stuff. So I want to pause here for questions.
Yes, we do have a question.
Yeah.
Question is, do you recommend a student should have more low or high-tech tools?
Great question. And I think this goes back to the idea of having a lot of tools. So it's not about having low tech or high tech tools. It's about having no tech strategies and low tech tools and high tech tools. And it's breaking it down for our students depending on what do you need to do. So the focus is, for example, reading. If I need to read, how would I want to read, as a web page? Or how might I want to read the assignment that comes from my teacher? Or how might I want to read this little book that's been assigned for homework? Versus how do I want to read when this is a pleasure reading book and I'm just reading for fun? And all those different types of reading tasks might be a different tool, and that is totally okay. But again, it's focusing on the task at hand. So is there a follow-up question about maybe breaking this down for a certain age or grade?
No, there is not. We do not have any other questions, but we do encourage everyone to ask away and take advantage of Dr. Ting Siu.
Okay, great. Yeah, please do ask questions, you guys. Otherwise, we're going to have a very, 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 very short webinar because I do want to make this as interactive as possible, even though your video and audios are off. So please ask away. Okay, so even though we've got these very high quality tactile teaching aids here that help give students that mental map of what's in the virtual landscape or in an app or a website, parents out there, if you don't have access to a swell machine, and I'm gonna guess that most households don't, I would say usually there's maybe one swell machine per school site if we're lucky. Most often it's one swell machine per district or county VI program. But there's lots of other ways you can do this as well at home. So one thing is, if you have some sort of tactile drawing board, such as the Draftsman tool, the Tactidoodle, I think it's called, from APH, or there's a very, very basic one called the Sensational Blackboard. Essentially what these tactile drawing tools are, it's like a rubbery mat, kind of like those rubbery sorts of placemats you can get from the dollar store that I've tried. And then you simply put a piece of paper on top of the rubbery mat, and you take a ballpoint pen and you push a little bit hard, not hard enough to poke through the paper, of course, but just hard enough that it creates a little bit of a rough line when you draw. This is a really easy way for anybody at home to be able to make a very basic tactile graphic of what an app might look like. And it's not so much that the students need to know exactly where the icons are laid out on an app, but it's more like just giving the students an orientation, like, okay, if I hear a star button, I know that this is about halfway on the app, and if I'm trying to get my feed for where my homework assignments are, it's going to be about on the left side of the screen. So maybe I'll just drag my finger around the left side, listen for something I'm familiar with, and then I can swipe around and find it. Because one thing about screen readers is it goes through information in a linear path. So you're hearing one link and then the menu item after it, the text after it, and it's as if you're following this one lane path down through a website. So a lot of our students who are navigating websites or apps non-visually, they're using a screen reader, and they don't get like the whole spatial layout, an overview of an app or website to be able to quickly point at something and click on it, but rather they're navigating in a more linear fashion. So in that way, it helps a lot to have a mental map of how an app or website is laid out. So, for example, if we look on this Google Drive tactile graphic here, if a student is looking for a particular file or folder, they have to know that, okay, if my screen reader is reading where the search bar is, I need to navigate a little bit further down the page before I can find my files or folders, okay? And I also want to encourage you guys to think about ways that you can teach these sorts of virtual concepts. So, such as the rotor, if you don't have a 3D printer, that's okay. What are other ways you can teach the idea of turning a dial or a knob? It could be, if you live in a house with actual doorknobs, you can use that idea of, oh yeah, remember the doorknob and how you have to turn it? This is like similar to what you have to do on your iPad screen.
Dr. Siu?
Yes.
We do have additional questions.
Great.
For you.
Yeah.
We do have one, Dr. Siu. Is the TVI program at San Francisco State accommodating for working parents?
Okay, great question. So one thing, our program has actually been on Zoom for years and years. So we are very well set up for online teaching and learning. All of the classes are usually from 4 to 7 p.m. about. So it is set up to accommodate people who are on a teaching work schedule. So many of our students are working full-time. I would say the majority. For one class, I usually tell students to budget about 10 hours of work, including class time. So it really depends on how many classes you take per semester. But generally, the classes meet once a week for 3 hours, and it's always between 4 and 7 p.m. for most classes.
The next question is, how do you determine what technology to introduce at home to supplement school tools and technology? My son is a rising 7th grader and totally blind. Are there options for purchasing used technology to cut costs?
Okay, can I actually hold on this question and let me zip forward a little bit here, okay? So let me come back to the question of, can I purchase used technology? And I want to talk about this technology learning curve, and we can think about what things you can do at home to support this, okay? So with the technology learning curve, I think about this in terms of, how do I introduce technology? And this is something that I would love to get your thoughts on, parents, too. So this is taken from chapter 10 in the book. Chapter 10 is all about instructional strategies with technology. And so what we've got here on the slide is a line graph, and the x-axis is labeled time, y-axis is labeled experience, and at the beginning of the graph, and so the overview of the graph is basically, it starts at 0, 0, and it goes up, and so by the end of it, it's like, this is where we want to accomplish, like, yes, I did it. I did what I wanted to do with technology. But the beginning of the curve, it rises up sharply, and it's like, ooh, the student might say, this looks like fun. And this technology learning curve, by the way, I think is relevant for both students and any of us, parents or teachers, who are learning technology. So at the beginning, it looks like fun, and then you start playing with it. And then the graph dips a little bit, because it's like, ooh, this is actually a little bit hard, and this is where some troubleshooting might come into play, But then you're like, okay, wait, I figured something out. And the graph shoots up a little bit, and it says, well, okay, I got no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep playing. I'm going to keep playing around. And there's a little, there's a rise here, and the graph says, now I get it. And then the line graph kind of like slightly comes down, because you think you get it, and then you're like, oh, wait, maybe I don't get it. And then the graph dips at the bottom, and it says, oh, I don't know my stuff at all. And this is where that troubleshooting really helps, because this is where you're troubleshooting. You're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Things aren't working the way I want it to work. I guess I don't know what I'm doing. But then you keep troubleshooting, you keep playing around, and then now the graph rises, and you're like, oh, wait, okay, this makes sense. And then you're like, oh, wait, did I just do that? And then you're like, yes, I accomplished my task. So for anybody who is learning technology, I think this first part of the graph, and especially those parts where the graph dips down, where you're like, oh, this is hard, wait, I don't know what I'm doing. This is what we have to work through. But if you look at how we get the curve to rise, it's like, oh, this looks like fun. No idea, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep doing it. Or, wow, this is actually starting to make sense. A lot of it is focused on play and exploration. And so in the home, and I know this is going to sound very challenging for parents, but the payoff is really big, okay? Just as other kids in the household see what's going on, they see you interacting on your devices, they see how when you make a phone call, you're calling a person, you're not even dialing a number anymore, but they see us interacting with technology. Our blind students, especially our blind children, they need to have those same sorts of incidental exposures to the technology that they will be using. So yeah, that might mean being brave and turning on voiceover, especially when you know that your child is listening in the room, so that the child has these same incidental experiences with hearing information if that's going to be their main method. Sighted kids, they see print everywhere before they can actually read it. So for a Braille reader, it'll be important to have a Braille display that will display Braille, even if that student can't read it yet. They need to start feeling the Braille under their fingers. They need Braille everywhere. They need Braille books. They need hard copy embossed Braille. They need those tactile graphics because, kids need, again, that concept. What is a book and what is a page before I can move to what is a page on a device. So for parents in the home, when you're touching all those different devices, throughout the day, learn some basic voiceover. Learn how to that shortcut on an iPhone or an iPad to be able to turn voiceover on really quickly, or learn what the shortcut is to turn on voiceover or a screen reader on your computer, whether it's a PC or a Chromebook or an Apple. Every single mainstream device now has accessibility features. Now, they do vary across devices, but even if it's not going to be a student's primary device or the type of technology they're going to use, in those early days of just, hey, this looks like fun, we got to get those kids in that beginning of the curve of this looks like fun. And the only way to do that is to give those kids those incidental experiences. And then in addition to the incidental experiences, we want to give them actual experiences. So I think the step one is just to let kids play, because kids need to experiment with how does information sound, or how does information feel under my fingers, or how can information be more visually accessible if I'm turning on low vision features. And we have to give kids the opportunity to play around with different ways of accessing information, because this is the beginning of helping kids understand how they can access information best, and how accessing information might change in different environments. So, if it's a noisy room or a noisy time of the day, those listening technology, the text-to-speech, probably not going to work as well. And you're going to want to experiment with, what does information feel like on the Braille display then? And so figuring out what apps are going to be accessible to the students that will help students get these play-based experiences is going to be huge. And when we first introduce technology, it's always got to be zero stakes. So you're not introducing technology to do a homework assignment, or definitely not for testing. But this first part, it's really just play, play, play. I'm going to play around with the features, play around with visual or auditory or visual access, and play around with what can I do with this technology. And then, students are going to move into playing around with what can I do with tech? What are the different ways I can read? And I'm not reading like a homework book, but what are different ways I might want to read a blog, or read a social media post, or read a recipe if we're cooking at home? And playing around with different ways to accomplish these tasks that are just fun tasks, not school. And I think that for most students, this is like year one of learning technology, is playing with the sensory efficiency for accessing, playing with what the tool can do, what are the limitations of a tool, or what can a tool do, or being able to compare, like, hey, when I use this app, I can do this, but when I use this app, I can do it better. When I use this low-tech tool, I can accomplish this, but I can't do that. But then when I switch to a high-tech tool, I can do this, but maybe this other thing is more problematic. So in general, I like to give kids a lot of choices. If we're talking about a low-tech tool, we're comparing different low-tech tools and talking about what are the pros and cons of different low-tech tools. If we're comparing, apps, we're going to look at a couple of different apps together and talk about what works, what doesn't work. If we're talking about a device, we're going to look at different devices and talk about, well, what do I like about this? What don't I like about this? What can this device do? What can this device do? And this is actually where technology vendors can be very, very helpful. They're going to be our critical partners here, because if you think about, giving our students choices, but also about the cost of a lot of these devices. Many vendors will give you like a 30-day trial to try these high-tech tools, and that's going to be really, really great for the student, because then they can really get into it and, again, make that informed decision. And I would do a lot of this compare and contrast and demoing before committing to a certain device. And this can be challenging, especially when there's budgetary limits. Absolutely, those used devices are, of course, you want to make sure they're still working in good condition. But the school should also be helping to support multiple devices. And a lot of this part is that advocacy piece of working with your TVI, working with your school team to understand that our students are entitled to the same number of different options for learning that everybody else gets. So no child only uses one device ever. So neither should our blind or low vision students. So, especially now with students learning from home, if a student needs technology to access their learning, they are entitled to bring that technology home with them. If you do want a second device, if you can justify why you need a CCTV at home, but then maybe a document camera in school for low vision students to be able to access things, or, do I need a full keyboard at home, but maybe a more mobile device at school? All of this goes into that justification. And, I think it's very powerful when a student can identify all the different ways they want to get their work done. Yeah.
We have several more questions that are coming through. So, the next question is there a free resource or software available for people who want to create their own tactile graphic designs?
Ooh, that is a great question. Okay, let's talk about that for a sec. But before we move on, I want to make sure you guys know about a resource called Blind Bargains. So Blind Bargains is a really great marketplace where people buy and sell used technology. So for that previous question about buying used technology, that's a really good website, and that's where I usually start if I'm looking for something that's been used and I want to pick up something on a bargain. So Blind Bargains, that is the website. Okay, so in terms of making your own tactile graphics, as mentioned before, there are those just easy peasy tactile drawing tools. So we've got the Tactidoodle from APH, we've got the Draftsman's tool, and we have the Sensational Blackboard. Those are my top three ones. But if you guys want to go super low tech, another thing that works really well is if you are able to get those sheet protectors that sometimes people use for reports, like submitting very polished reports. There's like those sheet protectors. Or if anybody still has really old school office supplies and has those overhead sheets, any type of those vinyl sheets, you can put on a rubber mat, just one of those dollar store placemats, and with a ballpoint pen, push a little bit hard, and you can draw on it. And what it does is the pen will actually degrade the surface of the paper a little bit, that like vinyl paper, so that you can actually draw the tactile graphic as it needs to be explored. So that is a very low tech way. If you want to look at a little bit higher tech, so the way those Piaf tactile teaching aids were made was these are usually just drawn in a word processing sort of program, such as Apple Pages or Microsoft Word. You can plop the icons in. You can download a Braille font so that you can actually have the Braille on here. And then these can be produced by printing it out on that specialized swell paper and running it through a swell machine. There's also various tactile graphics drawing software. So Tiger oh no, I'm blanking now, but it's available from View Plus. View Plus has a tactile graphic creation tool where you can design tactile graphics and then emboss them as well. So my favorite repository for tactile graphics is probably the B Tactile site, and it's the letter B and then spell out Tactile, Tactile. And what B Tactile does is it aggregates a lot of other tactile graphic imagery repositories. So you can go ahead and just search for an image you want. You can open the image and you can actually edit the tactile graphic to suit your needs as well.
Thank you, Dr. Siu. The next question is, what advice do you have for TVIs that have a large student caseload but want to give parents tools to help continue the teaching at home? This is for elementary school level.
Okay. Well, I mean, large caseloads for TVIs, that's always the ongoing pandemic for us. I think, especially if you're feeling very overwhelmed, it's always helpful to do a workload analysis to make sure that you can adequately dedicate the time needed for each student and family. So, if you are finding that you have to provide a lot of extra support to a family, especially now, that's technically consult time. Consult time covers consult with the school team, but also with the home team, because remember that parents are part of the IEP team. So make sure that you've got those consult minutes in your IEP to support the student. And doing a workload analysis means documenting the direct service minutes to a student, documenting the consult minutes that each student needs on a weekly basis, documenting how much prep time a student needs, how much time you usually do for IEP prep, and how many hours the IEP usually takes. And I usually like to break down my workload analysis to weekly minutes, because if you think about your weekly work week as being 35 hours a week, it makes sense to figure out how much time you really need to spend per student. And admins respond very well to data, and they need data to make good decisions. So going through the workload analysis will help you figure out what you're actually capable of serving and supporting. And you can bring that to your admins to help say, this is why we need another TVI on our team. Like, this caseload is too large for me, and I am not getting to this percentage of my minutes because I only have this much in my 35 or 37 hour work week. For the second part of the question, in terms of working with parents, again, this really is part of those consult minutes. And when we're in this remote teaching world, and I think with a lot of districts, we are having to consider either fully remote or hybrid options for going back to school. I prefer to focus on the silver linings. And we could talk all day about the challenges, but focusing on the silver lining is what's going to get us through these challenges. And one of the biggest silver linings that I have found when working with my own caseload is I'm so much better connected with the parents than ever before. I need to connect with parents to set up the meetings. For my older students, I can then schedule with them directly. For the younger students, yes, we need the parents' facilitation, especially when kids are in elementary school. I want that parent to be, listening in or knowing exactly what we're doing, because that technology implementation is really, it needs parent involvement. And for any of you guys, just so you know, for any of you guys who might be working with families who speak a different language than you do, it's not perfect, but I also will use some translation apps. So there was a Spanish-speaking family I was working with, and my Spanish is way too basic to be able to really communicate with the parent in terms of what's needed. I'll use Google Translate, and we will just have text exchanges. Or I also found this new app called Hello Translate that will actually say sentences that I want to say in a different language. So try these different translation apps. And again, they're not perfect, but sometimes it's just enough to get the message across. And I think it's, it's equally important and valuable for us to make our efforts in communicating with families who have a different language than us.
Thank you. Next question is, with virtual learning happening due to COVID, how do you juggle keyboarding skills versus Braille for young elementary students?
Oh, this is such a good question. And I have to say, it's one that I struggle with a lot too. So, so remember that kids need to play. Kids need to explore what can be done. And Braille is our students' form of literacy if they're non-visual learners. So no matter how well a student can listen, no matter how in tune or how natural their listening skills are, we still need our kids' fingers on Braille, okay? Because Braille is needed for editing, for checking their work, and it's ultimately needed for college and employment success. So understanding that, balancing Braille keyboard entry versus QWERTY keyboard entry, I think equal time needs to be dedicated to both. So, even students who might be on a note taker, they still need to develop really, really good computer skills. And kids need to be exposed to all these different tools in many different formats, in different opportunities. So, this goes back to training the students in all the different types of tools so that they can make those informed decisions in the future. For little kiddos, obviously when they're working on learning Braille, it's probably easier to be reading and writing in Braille, and you've got your Braille brain on. So you're learning Braille, you're doing 6-key entry to write Braille, and you're reading and writing. So always accessing, but also creating at the same time. So in those instances, I think that's a great opportunity to practice the 6-key entry. So you're working on the Perkins. You might also do 6-key entry on an actual Braille display. But then, QWERTY keyboarding, you can also do that to learn where the keys are, and also to start with that early screen reader teaching. So when you're teaching a screen reader, the prerequisite to learning a screen reader is QWERTY keyboarding. So you might reserve, Braille reading and Braille writing for when you're really working on those reading and writing lessons. And then when you're just playing on the computer, you're going to play with that QWERTY keyboard and see where the keys are. And I will tell you, kids, once the kids learn the home row, and the home row is the only part where I think you really need to drill, once kids have the home row, they are going to take off so easily because the home row is what gives our kids the anchor point in where they are on the computer. So remember, it's always like, okay, where am I in space? Where am I on the keyboard? Kids need anchor points. So once they've got the little bumpies under the F and J, they've got the home row, now you can start doing, your keyboard drills can start building muscle memory. So it's like, learning ing, the, and going through the word families, which incidentally aligns with a lot of phonics instruction as well. So you can figure out opportunities where, if the class is going through word families, maybe you pick out those types of letter combinations to do the keyboard QWERTY practice. But then if you're going through a spelling list, maybe that's when you use 6-key entry because you're really thinking about spelling, and writing. So, I think it might seem a little bit overwhelming to have all these different things going on at a time, but again, it's focusing on the task at hand and what you want to accomplish and making sure there's ample opportunities for everything.
Thank you. Next question is, what are the best devices or apps when it comes to photo description?
Oh, okay. So for photo description, there are some different things, different options depending on if it's a physical photo or a physical picture that you want to get access to, versus a photo, on the screen or on the internet. And so there are a lot of different visual interpreter apps, and different apps have different, pros and cons, as with all technology. There's a really good article that I often reference. So if you do a Google search for visual interpreter apps and Chancey Fleet, and that's spelled Chancey, and then Fleet is Fleet. She wrote a really good article that went through all the different visual interpreter apps and compared and contrast them. So, for example, you might have heard of apps called Be My Eyes, TapTapSee, Ira. There's different pros and cons to using different apps. If you're thinking about looking at these visual interpreter apps for kids under 18, you definitely want to check and understand what kind of privacy and access to information, personal information, each app will give. So some of these apps, you might post a picture. You may either take a picture of something in real life or, post a screenshot of something and ask, hey, what is this? Any number of people all over the world could be describing that. So you want to be sure that you're not potentially opening your child to random weird adults, being able to provide input. And you also want to make sure that kids understand if they're taking a picture of something in their environment, you want to make sure you're not giving away some private information when you're taking that picture. In terms of images online, especially on social media, a lot of social media tools now have built-in options for alt text, so alternative text. So when you're looking at a document, whether it's a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word doc or PowerPoint slide or a Google slide that's being given out in lecture, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of these different programs, when you upload an image, there is a feature to insert the alt text so that when a blind student is accessing the image, they will get that description for the image. Now, a lot of this comes back to advocacy, though, because whoever uploads that image has to know to insert the alt text. So this is something that teachers, if they're going to be disseminating a lot of pictures in their documents and slides, they need to know that they need to put the alt text in there. Otherwise, we're constantly in this catch-up game of, oh, I can't access it. I need to get somebody else to now put in the image description, where if there is just a little bit more community education about the need for and benefits of alternative text, this becomes more of an environmental issue. So just, giving some education on school teams that alt text is needed. And, friends and family, when you're posting images on social media, you can use the alt text feature, or you can just simply follow your social media post with a little image description.
Thank you. Next question is, when a student has reached grade 6, what are the devices they should be familiar with by that age?
Okay. Oh, sorry, age 6, was it?
Grade 6.
Grade 6, okay.
Yes.
So grade 6, we're talking about middle school years. So I don't think it's possible to prescribe specific devices, but by grade 6, 6th graders are needing to read reading packets independently. So whatever technology a student needs to access and read these reading packets, great. In 6th grade, students are also doing expository writing. So whatever technology is needed for a student to write, but also edit and draft and revise their drafts, that's going to be very important. So, when you think about the writing process, I like to actually zoom out a little bit and talk about authoring. So there's a whole chapter in my book about tools for authoring. So if you think about authoring, and this is really like middle school skills here, kids have to outline their thoughts, and then they need to expand on these thoughts and make a draft. So when you're drafting, yeah, we've got the 6-key Braille input, we've got the QWERTY keyboard, but then how do I review my draft? I might listen to my draft, but then also have my Braille display so I can really go in and check the spelling and punctuation. If I'm a low vision student, I may use text-to-speech to listen to it, but I'm also going to need to know how do I, check it visually with my low vision tools if I need to check for punctuation or spelling. And then how do I make my edits? And then how do I reread? So the whole authoring process is a combination of reading and writing tools. And then it's understanding, well, how are students going to share this information? So am I going to email it to my teacher? Do I just save it to a shared folder with my teacher so they can get it that way? It's really understanding what are the tasks a 6th grader needs to do. And then of course, looking ahead, if I know that in 8th grade, the students are learning about note-taking strategies, maybe in 7th grade, end of 7th grade, I'm going to start introducing a couple different apps for note-taking and have the student just play with it. You say, listen kid, try this app, try this one. Let's just compare and contrast 2 at a time, or maybe depending on the kid, we just try this one for a month, we try another one for a month, we compare and contrast. But in middle school, I expect my students to be able to explain what their visual impairment means to a teacher. So it's like, okay, I have I have this particular eye condition. What it means is that I'm unable to see X, Y, and Z. And when I'm unable to see X, Y, and Z, I need to get my materials in this kind of format. So in middle school, kids need to start developing this language for how to explain their visual impairment and how to explain the accommodations they need. And in order to explain that, middle schoolers need to understand why they need these accommodations. So it's getting them to understand their functional vision. And when students understand their functional vision, they can justify the accommodations they need and now ask for the accommodations they need. They should be able to make really informed decisions about what tools I need for doing this or that kind of task.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what do you do when your TVI is not tech savvy and your kid has outpaced them? And we have an additional question to that. How do you get the tech training you know your kids needs?
Okay, wow, this is certainly a loaded question. And, it is so hard to keep up with technology because it's like you learn something, you think you know it, and the ground shifts under you. Know that TVIs feel this pressure more than anybody. For me personally, I think that is so important to have a community of practice to connect to. So, for TVIs, we have a lot of social media networks to connect to. I think it's really important that both parents and TVIs are connected to these communities of practice. So you need to always be in the conversation where you could say, oh, I've got a student who needs X, who's got ideas? Or hey, has anybody used this app? Or does anybody have a recommendation for that app? And parents, get involved with your local NFB parent chapter because you guys have a strong voice in this and you will be a better advocate when you've got the information and you're kind of in those conversations. If you happen to have a TVI who is very far behind and needs very dedicated professional development, know that it is in the federal requirements of IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It is within the federal requirements that personnel, including paras and teachers, get the training they need in order to support their students. So one thing that gets a little bit sticky here is a lot of the professional development that's given by a district or county program is not relevant to blind and low vision students. So a lot of those professional developments that TVIs are offered, it's not specific to VI. So it's not giving those TVIs the professional development they need. And so this is when, if the district is not providing in-house the professional development that a TVI needs, that district is actually federally, legally obligated to send that TVI to get the professional development they need. And that might be supporting that TVI's attendance to conference. It might be hiring somebody and contracting that professional development in to get that PD in the district. And oftentimes a TVI will advocate for this, and different districts and counties are, they have different variations of how well they support their staff. But remember that the parent voice is very, very strong. So you can actually help the TVI advocate for that necessary PD. So especially if you feel that your child has surpassed the TVI, what else do they need? My TVI needs more training. Bring this up at the IEP meeting. And you're not calling out the TVI on this, but you're going to work with the TVI before the meeting and plan and prep like a strategy for bringing this up to be able to help the TVI advocate for that needed professional development. The other thing is, we, and I say we as a fellow TVI, we can get all the professional development in the world, but unless we're actually using this access technology in our daily tasks, we're never going to be, it's very difficult to gain the proficiency as an individual who is blind and uses these same technologies in their daily experiences. So I think it is so important for especially our blind students to connect with blind friends and have blind mentors and learn from the blind people who can give them that mentorship that typically sighted professionals cannot. I can't speak for a blind professional and what tools and workarounds they use because I'm not a blind professional. And so that's a big limitation for what I can teach my student. But what I can do is connect my student to the blind mentors so they can get the mentorship that I can't provide. And so the TVI can be a very critical partner here to connect the student with other blind students, and students will figure out their own workarounds, but also to those blind adult mentors who can provide that real mentorship for how do I really get ready for college and work and be successful.
Thank you, Dr. Siu. Next question is, are there any refreshable Braille displays capable of displaying tactile graphics?
Oh man, this is the holy grail of refreshable Braille displays. So right now, the closest thing to market is probably the Canute, spelled C-A-N-U-T-E. And that's a device that's being developed in the UK. I know that they are in communications with people here in the US about introducing it to the US market. I don't have the information to know about, is it really ready for market? How close are they to making it a commercial product? APH was testing the graffiti a while ago, and that was also the closest thing we had to a refreshable display for tactile graphics. But I have to say, unfortunately, the technology for there, it's still coming. It's not here yet because it's really costly. And also the technology for making the Braille pins go up and down. There are just so many different ways to do it, but cost is a very prohibitive factor in the research and development of this type of technology.
Next question, does your book have lesson plans? And can you share the link where to purchase it?
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have lesson plans per se, but throughout the book, I link to various posts on the Paths to Technology site that talks about ideas for how to lesson plan. There is one lesson plan that I highlighted in chapter 10 that takes people through an illustration of how do I navigate this technology learning curve and how do I scale up kids' digital literacy skills. So there is one kind of sample lesson that takes us through, that will take the reader through how do I support the student in playing, how do I play with tasks, now how do I shift to academic tasks. But there are different ideas, and it's really more of like giving a guide for how to think about designing instruction.
do you happen to have a link where to purchase your book?
Oh, right, the link. Okay, so I usually just Google search everything because links are just impossible to remember and then they change. So if you just Google Access Technology and APH, or American Printing House for the Blind, it should come up that way.
Thank you. Next question is there anything you can tell us about how a blind student can use a Chromebook if she doesn't have a regular laptop?
Okay, great. I was hoping somebody would bring up the Chromebook question, so thank you so much for that. I think Chromebooks are the ultimate backup device for every single student because it is the most easily available technology in most classrooms. With the Chromebook, though, as with any device, it's good to understand what you can do with it and what are the limitations. So what the Chromebooks have done with accessibility, they're constantly improving. And if you just Google search, you can do a Google search for Google accessibility, you will find contacts for the Google accessibility team. They're always working to improve. In terms of access for a totally blind student, Chromebooks have a built-in screen reader called Chrome Vox. So Chrome and then VOX. So that's the built-in Chromebook screen reader. Depending on who you talk to, Chrome Vox can be a fully functional screen reader for what you can do on a Chromebook. Having said that, I think just because the Chromebook is a more basic computing device, it's probably still going to be a backup tool for most blind students because most blind students will need something a little bit more robust to do all the different things they need to do. But Chromebooks are a great backup tool, and especially for our younger students who are just kind of learning and experimenting with technology, Chromebooks are awesome because you can play around with a lot of different things on a Chromebook. One thing with the Chromebook and Chrome Vox is actually totally accessible with the Typing Club keyboarding program. So that's really nice that Typing Club is now fully accessible. So it's a great kind of training wheels, early keyboarding program. For low vision students, it really depends on the availability of Chrome apps and extensions and what features you can download onto the Chromebook to get the accessibility you need out of it. I have found that for low vision students with multiple disabilities who need a simpler computing system, who might be using a switch to click around the computer, the Chromebooks are really great because it's just a more pared down system. However, would a Chromebook ever be the student's one and only device? Probably not, simply because, again, every student needs a range of tools. And for students where the Chromebook is just a backup device, they're still going to need a primary computing device to give them the work power that they might need.
Thank you, Dr. Siu. I would like to mention that we have shared the link in the Q&A chat if you are interested in purchasing Dr. Siu's book.
Oh, thank you. You're doing that.
You're welcome. Next,
I get no royalties, by the way, so it's not an ethical conflict of interest, but just so you know.
Yes, thank you. Next question is, at what age should parents introduce technology, and any suggestions besides Braille Buzz as a first tech device?
Yeah, okay. So our students need introduction to technology way earlier than other students. And so if you anticipate that your child will be participating in high-stakes standardized testing starts in grade 3. That means if you look at this technology learning curve, you need to backtrack when students need to start experimenting with technology. And I feel like in these early years, when kids are at the very beginning of the journey, it's about a 3-year learning curve. So year 1 is really just playing with how do I access information. Year 2 is playing around with, okay, what can I accomplish with technology? And then finally year 3, it's like, okay, I'm going to focus on the task while using technology. So in the very beginning, with introducing kids to technology, it's more about those incidental learning experiences. So, if you're looking something up or calling somebody, maybe turn voiceover on and kids can get that idea. If it's with Braille, we still do want Braille books. We want embossed Braille materials. The Braille Institute has the great book program. In case you guys don't have the link, maybe you can put the link there where parents can sign up or TVIs can sign up for the Braille books to be sent to the home. Students still need those really good Braille, embossed Braille materials with tactile graphics. What you can do to introduce a Braille display, though, is just having Braille on the display, and you can start with the peg slate from APH. That's a little bit larger, and it's a manual push pin system where you can make Braille letters on there. Just for students to start getting the idea of, well, I can feel Braille on paper, but I can also feel it on this kind of display type of thing. And then the Braille Buzz is a really great early learning device as well. When students start moving into having little reader books, you might connect a Braille display so that it's available for students. Students are learning how to write. You might have a Braille letter or a Braille word on a Braille display, so they get the idea of feeling the Braille on the display, but then they're actually brailing it on their Perkins. So kind of like copying from the board. You could have the text on the Braille display for a student to copy. So there's a lot of different ways to cut it, but just think about how sighted students might be getting access to print, and you just want to, make sure those kind of equitable experiences are there in Braille.
Thank you. We have one more question, or time for one more question.
Sure.
And that is, as a parent wanting to support my 5th grader, I struggle with keeping up with the latest apps or new technology. How do I keep up with him when he enters middle school and high school to better support, but also to keep an eye out? Yeah.
My best resource for keeping up with the newest stuff is I subscribe to the Passive Technology newsletter. So, even though I don't think anybody wants more email, the Passive Technology newsletter is really great. It's usually, maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks I'll get the newsletter delivered right to my email. And it always has the most cutting edge information on what are the newest apps available, what are some new teaching techniques. And so I do like that subscription a lot. In terms of, just looking forward and staying on top of things, what I do as a TVI is if I know a student, let's say I have a student in 6th grade, I'm going to look at the 6th grade standards, like the core curriculum standards, math and language arts standards, to see what 6th graders are going to be expected to do. And so that helps me identify what are the tasks that my 6th grader is going to face. And now I can backtrack and think about, okay, what are the technologies that this kid's going to need in order to accomplish these tasks? And then I'm usually looking forward a year, actually, because if I know that in 7th grade they're going to be doing a lot of online research, then maybe in 6th grade I'm going to make sure there's a lot of fun play-based experiences looking up information, so that when they have to do it for more high-stakes learning in 7th grade, there's already some experience using that kind of technology for looking stuff up.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for asking questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. There's so many other questions here, but we truly appreciate your questions as well. And any final notes, Dr. Siu?
Yeah, so on this final slide, I just prepared a couple back to school resources for you guys. For parents who want to get a sense of what's available and kind of looking ahead to how to prepare my kid, I love Veronica with 4 Eyes blog. So her blog is actually called Veronica with 4 Eyes, and it's spelled Veronica with 4-letter eyes .com. And Veronica is a low vision college student who has an eye condition where sometimes her vision becomes not usable. So she's got really great blog posts for both low vision and non-visual access to information, and lots of posts about what helps her in accessing work, but also accessing just like fun stuff. How did she prepare for college? What helped? She's even got a post like what I wish my TVI taught me, that kind of thing. So Veronica gives really good perspectives on how to prepare. As we are moving into remote and hybrid learning, I think the Described and Captioned Media Program, or DCMP, is also going to be a huge resource. So DCMP has a library of thousands of videos that have already been described. So if you find that a video has been assigned to a student, you can check DCMP, see if it's already there and available with description. And also, if you are finding a lot of YouTube content, I didn't put it on the slide, but there's another tool called YouDescribe, Y-O-U, and then the word describe. So youdescribe.org is a free tool that anybody can use to add description to any YouTube video. And that describe video can also be shared with a link. And then finally, with the Perkins PASA technology, it's really my go-to resource. They do a fantastic job. Diane Bronner runs the site, and she is just the wizard for what we need to know about technology. And the latest post, for example, that I just got in the newsletter the other day, it's titled Apps to Teach Voiceover Gestures. So for those of you guys who are working with little kiddos and want to get a jump start on how to introduce your child to voiceover, or how you can learn about voiceover, this is a great blog post that includes apps that kind of gamify how to learn voiceover gestures. Okay, and with that, thank you so much, you guys, for joining me in this webinar. Thank you, Braille Institute, for having me. And I will give it back to Carla to close this out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Ting Siu, for providing such an informative webinar. We hope everyone enjoyed, and thank you to all who asked such insightful questions. As a reminder, all finalists have received Dr. Ting Siu's book, and we encourage everyone to purchase her book as well. We have recorded this webinar, and it will be posted on our YouTube page. So please visit youtube.com/Braille Institute to access later, and feel free to share that link as well. Be sure to follow our social media accounts, facebook.com/Braille Institute Youth, and instagram.com/Braille Institute Youth to stay connected and see more updates, photos, and videos of the remote finals process. You can use the hashtags #Braille Challenge 2020 and #Keep Calm and Braille On. We will be sending a short post-webinar evaluation survey via email, so please look out for that survey. It helps us a lot if you can respond to the survey, so thank you in advance for your participation and feedback. The final remaining webinar in the series is scheduled for tomorrow, and that is Braille Challenge Alumni Panel, presented by the Braille Challenge alumni. That'll be taking place at 12 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. And of course, please everyone be sure to tune in to our Remote Braille Challenge Finals award ceremony next Friday, July 31st at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It will be live streamed through our YouTube channel, so you can go to youtube.com/Braille Institute. You can visit braillechallenge.org for more information and a link to the live stream. Once again, thank you, Dr. Ting Siu. Thank you to everyone for joining, and congratulations to our Braille Challenge finalists. And we'll see you in our next webinar and at the finals award ceremony. Remember, keep calm and Braille on.